Hey everybody, welcome back. We're gonna assemble a CCM Libertoy. So we're doing this for a customer. Here's the wing panel. We already showed this model off in a previous video. This wing panel weighs 234 grams and it has the IDS pre-installed for ailerons and flaps. So we're gonna get started with putting the servos in the wing. And to start us off, I have a KST X08H, which we're going to put into the ailerons. The first thing I'm going to do is pull out these screws, and a while back, Servo Ramen changed their screws to Torx, which I actually prefer because the Phillips head screws they were using were hard to find a correct screwdriver for. But anyway, there you go, T6. I picked up a set of these little Torx screwdrivers on Amazon for just a few bucks. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull the pin out of the IDS hub or arm or whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to remove the hub. So sometimes it's easier just to get a flathead screwdriver and do a little very light prying to kind of tease it out. The X08 frames don't have bearings, so there you go, there's that. Now the reason I took that guy out was that I want to test fit it on the servo. I'm sure you guys have seen me do this a bunch of times before, but I think it's kind of a critical step. So I'm just going to get a little bit of grease. Vaseline works, chapstick works, whatever you got really. I'm going to put that on the output shaft. And then, let's see, we'll grab the hub and just try to figure out how it wants to sit on here. Now the idea with this is we want to get it to the point where the hub goes on the servo fairly easily and is fully seated, because you really don't want to be prying or pushing on this with a lot of force when it's in the model, in the wing. Just keep working this until you get it to fit properly, so you can see it's somewhat seated here. And then what I'm going to do is just going to kind of pull it on and off several times. Probably do this about, I don't know, 5 or 6 times. And then we can go ahead and put it back in the wing. Okay, this is something I keep harping on and on about every time I do one of these, but I think it's important. If you look at a KST servo, it'll focus. Right in here, there's actually a radius, because when this case is machined, the tool is coming down like this. And obviously you can't make a square edge, so there's a radius in here. And then if we look at where that part sits right there, that is completely square. So what happens is that edge, that square edge, won't let the servo be seated down all the way. So I take a Dremel with any kind of roundish bit, and just kind of knock that edge down a little bit. Just like that. Just put a little bevel on it and do that to both sides. So I have the servo hooked up to a tester and it's centered, and we might have to program the servo later to get it perfect. And I have the output shaft back in there. And I'm just going to hook up the arm again, so I'm going to run this pin through. Got it on the first shot there. It's almost unheard of. There we go. So now we'll see how our servo fits. So we're going to try to keep the aileron somewhat neutral or centered and see how close we get. And you can rock it back and forth to get a feel for where it wants to notch into the output shaft. So something like that. And now this is the part where you kind of got to put some force on the servo to drive it into that hub. And if we didn't pre-fit it, this would be a very difficult task, and you could damage your wing very easily. So that's in. Now we'll run our little torque screws in. And you don't want to crank on these too hard, just kind of so they're snug. If you crank on them too hard, you could deform the top wing surface. So that's in, and I can tell by the deflection on the aileron that we will have to do some programming here to get it perfect. Alright, gotta put the servos into the fuselage now. So it's a two-piece fuselage here, and this is pretty much identical to the toy, the 2-meter toy, in the way that the servos mount. They mount in the boom right here, which is really neat. And again, we're going to be using KST X08H's. So here's the nose pod, and for now we'll just set this aside. And we'll go ahead and get our servos ready to put into the boom. So we're going to get ready to get the servos installed in the boom, and I'm going to go with the single-sided servo arm that comes with the X08s. And I'm using the arm that sort of has the reverse offset here, so it's closer to the case of the servo. And we'll be using basically the second hole from the output shaft, because we don't need long arms here. And I'm going to go ahead and just use some small ball links for this, because the length is pretty short and we don't have much room here for a clevis and a coupler. So I think the ball links will work out just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and trim up these arms, and I'm going to drill this hole out for the screws that come with these. I believe that's 1.5 millimeter. Okay, let me show you what I have going on with the servos. So I've got the arms prepped. So I cut them down. I drilled those holes out with a 1.5 millimeter drill bit. And on the ball links here, I've ground down a little taper on the end and drilled a hole straight through them. It's hard to see, but there is a hole in there. And I tried to scuff up on the inside a little bit too. All in an attempt to get the glue we're going to use to get a really good bite on there and have a lot of mechanical adhesion going on there. So those are ready to go in. And then on the boom itself, I've trimmed back the outer sheath. So what I'm going to do is I have the arms set at 90 on the servos, and I'm just going to kind of set everything in and use like a silver marker to mark where I need to make my cuts. And the tail has been taped up. It's been taped up here in neutral position, both the elevator and the rudder. So I'm going to go ahead and make my marks and cut the push rods. Okay, forgive the background noise, it's raining pretty bad right now. I marked and cut the carbon push rods, so that's all good. We're basically ready to glue. I still need to drill some tiny holes for the servo screws. I gotta find a really tiny drill bit for that. But I wanted to point out one thing that I did. I was trying to get the alignment on the push rods as straight as possible here. They were kind of bowing out, so I was trying to get the push rods to seat as far back as possible that way. So that way on this one and that way on the other one. And basically what I did was I ground down a little bit of the rear side of the servo pocket. So I ground a little recess for the wire on the back of the servo here, and I ground down a little bit here and here, and a little bit on this edge right here, and that just allowed me to push the servo back as far as I can basically, and that gave me a fairly straight shot to the push rod, so less stress on everything there. So I'm going to use I think JB weld, and I'm going to go ahead and get these glued up, and then once that's dry we'll screw them down and we're basically done with the boom. Alright, we're going to move on to installing flap servos now. KST X10 minis, and it's going to be the same procedure as the ailerons. So we're going to first take our screws out, and then we're actually going to pull the IDS arm or hub or whatever you want to call it off the frame and make sure that it fits nicely onto the output shaft of the servo here. So that's what we'll do. Okay, so I took the arm off the IDS and I have the servo. Again, we put a little bit of grease around there, and we're just gonna get the horn fit on there, pull it off, and we're gonna just do this. I'm gonna do this like 10 times, just to make sure that I can install this in the wing fairly easily without damaging anything, and I don't have to use a ton of force to get everything seated. Alright, so this time I've left the horn on the servo, and we'll go ahead and install the servo like that. So I'm just going to pull the flap all the way to the down position to move that arm out of the way, and then we can get the servo in. And just try to gently get it seated in the bearing. Do not want to put too much force on things. You know what? I actually might put some grease on the arm that goes into the bearing. Just a little bit. You know, these things never go super smooth, but you just got to be really patient, and you don't want to put too much force on any of this stuff. There we go. Okay. So that's in there, and now we can try to get the servo arm up and in place. Get the pin. Pin kind of started. There we go. It's good. Pins in there. And then we can run in our main screws. And then there's a brace that goes in the back, and I'm going to call that optional. Especially on a light model. We'll run these main screws in. Go. And so yeah, if you want to put that back brace in, go ahead and do that. And I'm just going to power up the servo real quick and see what it looks like. Let me zoom out. So that's the kind of offset we got that needs to be trimmed out, but we can see what kind of up travel we get. Yeah. Plenty of up aileron travel and tons of down, so I'm pretty happy with that. Just go ahead and finish buttoning up the servo with the screws. Okay, so I'm going to program the servos now, and I'm just going to try to match up the flap servos, and then we'll center the aileron servos. So I got my KST programming tool right here. I'm going to plug the battery in, and then we'll plug the servo in, and we shall see where we're at there. And then I'm just going to go ahead and do the other one to see where that center is. that is quite a bit different. So I don't know what happened there, but I have the kind of the down offset I'm looking for there, and over here we have the servo kind of in the up aileron position. So I might have to pull this servo out again and readjust that horn. Right, get that servo adjusted, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to match this flap to this flap there. So I'm going to measure our offset from neutral, which is about 9 millimeters. So let's get the programmer set up again. I like to use an extension. Plug the battery in. So let's wind this down. We're looking for 9 millimeters here. It's good there. Hit enter. Happy with that. Now what we'll do is we'll drive the servos to neutral or just move them there. We could do it by hand, it's not a big deal. So we're just going to try to line the flap servos up with the fuselage. That looks good there. And then we're going to move on to the ailerons. And we're just going to try to line them up with the flaps there. So let's plug in aileron servo. I'm just going to cycle the power. Okay, so let's hit enter on the programmer. There we go, there's that one. Just one more aileron to do. And I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera because I kind of got to rearrange things. Kind of trying to button up the tail here, the fuselage servos, and I had to do a little bit of work. Here's the back, and I just ground this area down slightly. Just put a little radius right there just so that the elevator horn could have a little more clearance for some down travel right in there. And on the rudder, you can see right there I put a little tiny radius there too, for the elevator horn to get more travel, just to get a little bit more travel in both directions there. So now what I'm going to do is put the tails back on, hook up the push rods. I'm going to get the servo centered, program the center, and I need to get the screws in the arms, get that buttoned up, and I have a few more holes to drill for the hold downs here. Okay, kind of buttoned up the boom here, the servo installation, and just a few little notes. I used the screws that came with the KST X08 servos here, and you're going to want to use a pin vise and a very, very tiny drill bit to drill those holes. And then on the ball links here, I actually put a little tiny bit of thread lock on these screws, on the threads of the screws here, before I threaded them into the brass ball, just for a little added layer of protection there. And yeah, so that's basically buttoned up. I programmed the servos so the arms are perpendicular and things line up pretty well at the tail. So that basically wraps up the boom. Alright, I got some tape wrapped around the wires here, the servo connectors, electrical tape, ailerons and flaps, and now it's going to be time to install the servo covers, and I think I'll be using the canopy glue for that. So I'm going to go ahead and tuck these wires in nicely and see if I can get the servo covers installed. Alright, I ended up using some 12 12mm or 1/2 inch pinstripe tape to hold the servo covers down. So there we go. That's basically the wings all buttoned up. Right there. Everything's really good. Everything came out really good. Got the servos programmed. And yeah, we'll just finish up the fuse now, and we'll see about getting the motor installed. Okay, moving along with the fuselage, it's time to install the firewall into the fuselage, or the nose pod here. And for this particular model, we're going to go with a 10-shock 1515. 15 turn with the Eisenhower gearbox. Have this already kind of loosely installed on the motor mount. And I'm running into a slight issue here because the distance from the front canopy opening to the nose is so short that the can of the motor kind of hits the lip here on the canopy, and the canopy doesn't want to seat in, so we're actually going to have to grind out a little bit of material here, and I'm going to have to remove this lip and kind of make a new front attachment system, which shouldn't really be that difficult. Okay, I have a straight edge here kind of on the center line of the airfoil, and to me the motor has some upthrust in it, so I'm going to recut the front opening here to try to get some down thrust. So what I'm going to do is remove about 2.5 millimeters of material from the bottom. So we're kind of going to recut this like that, so we can get the motor to go down a little bit. And because we're asking the motor to go down, it kind of comes up and hits this lip right there, and that's why we have to remove some material there. Alright, that nose is cut back to get some down thrust. I didn't really cut it, I just sanded it. And then, so we have the motor here, this is ready to go. And I have some thickened 24-hour epoxy that's thickened with Cabosil, or a little bit of, sometimes it's called aerosol, Cabosil, whatever. And I had to totally grind off the front of this canopy to make it fit. So we're gonna do something there later, but first we'll get the motor installed. So just gonna I'm gonna apply this, a thin layer to the inside of the fuselage, then push the motor in, and we'll use masking tape to hold it down. Alright, so the motor mount is now glued in permanently. That came out real nice. And the next thing to do is to try to get a front mounting system for the canopy. I've put some tape here and basically trimmed it pretty nicely here and here, and you can see that there's no room there where the lip used to be. The motor is right up against the fuselage. So what we're going to do is put the canopy on securely in place, and I'm going to put 2 pieces of carbon. They're going to get epoxied in like that. They'll get epoxied into the canopy and then just go under the lip on the fuselage, and that should hold the canopy down securely. So I drew the little lines just to help me align things. Let me show you what I got here for the canopy. So we have 2 2mm carbon rods. Right now they're just tacked in with CA. And the fuselage, I did grind out the areas just under those lines a little bit. And this is actually fitting quite well. So if I put the front in, and then we can snap the back down. It's quite tight right here. No gap at all. So I'm really happy with that. So what we'll do is just take this off, and we're going to put some epoxy back here to secure these pins, and then when the epoxy is dry, I'll shorten them up a little bit too, cut a little bit off the length. Alright, kind of jumped ahead several steps. I have the Libertoy on the CG machine, and this is what we're getting here. 1111 grams, and as it sits right now, the CG is 92.5. And according to CCM, the CG range is 90 to 98 millimeters. So we're like doing really well. We're right in the ballpark here. And I have some of the equipment just kind of set in here. So we have the motor, obviously, which has been installed. The firewall, we glued that in earlier. That's been cleaned up and it's looking good. And we have a CCM 30 millimeter spinner for a 6 millimeter shaft, and a CCM, I believe this is a 12 by 8 prop set, and it fits the fuselage just beautifully. That's all good. So Talon 60 in there, and then we have a 3S 850 milliamp battery, and I have just one of my receivers in here for now. So yeah, this is all great. I'm basically just gonna button this up as it is, and the customer will have a little bit of leeway on adjusting a CG just by changing the weight of the battery or possibly moving it a little bit. So if you wanted to get a little more nose heavy, you get a slightly bigger battery. If you wanted to go to a more rearward CG, you could just move this back a little bit. So looking great. Here is the system we came up with for the front canopy hold down. 2 dowels, carbon dowels epoxied in, and this works really well. If I can get some of these wires tucked in. So this nose is 2.4 friendly. I would recommend routing the antennas outside of the fuselage anyway. I'm going to leave that for the customer. So canopy's on, and we have a really great flush fit here. Look at that. Beautiful. Beautiful. Looking great. This is going to be just a spectacular sport model. I'm going to wrap this video up here. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully sometime in the near future we'll be able to fly one of these. But for now, this one's going to get packed up and shipped out. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.